Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'd like to touch upon a few things that will help you identify real vintage costume jewelry as opposed to vintage inspired costume jewelry. This will be especially useful to you if you're shopping estate sales, flea markets, but also if you are looking at online stores or auctions such as on eBay or Etsy, because vintage is a very hot search word right now. So a lot of people will put the word vintage in their title, and then in the description, if you're not careful, you might miss where they say vintage inspired. And vintage inspired just means that it is not really a vintage piece. It is a piece that is made today, just made to look like a vintage item. As an example, these earrings, this pin, and this collar necklace are all vintage inspired. They're not really vintage pieces. But all of these pieces right here are true vintage pieces. So one way that you can tell online right away if this might be a vintage inspired piece is if the picture looks like it's a stock photo, or like it's something from a catalog. If you see, for example, if you saw this pin just floating on a plain white background, you would know that that's probably just a mass-produced piece and that the seller probably has 100 of them. So if there are not a lot of pictures on the auction or the store listing, and you just see one stock photo, that's probably your first clue that this is not truly a vintage piece. Because somebody who is really selling a true vintage piece will take photos from different angles and show you all the wear and show you the stones and things like that. Now another thing that you can look at is the clasp. Pretty much everything that is made today is going to have the lobster clasp, which is this right here, which is the one that we're all familiar with. You just pull on this and the little hook opens up, and then you just insert it in anywhere on the extender. And 99% of the jewelry today has a lobster clasp. So that's going to be your first clue. If you're looking at pictures on eBay, if you're at an estate sale and they claim they have a lot of vintage jewelry, if you're at a flea market and they tell you that what you're looking at is vintage, look at the clasp. And now some of the clasps that were used on vintage jewelry, for example, is the hook clasp, which is this one. It's called the fish hook or the shepherd's hook. And that basically just hooked into this little opening right here. And as you can see on a vintage piece, the part of the jewelry that's going to get the most wear is obviously going to be the clasp, because it's what rubs the most against your skin. It's in constant contact with your skin. And this particular clasp was used in the 50s and 60s. Now here we have another. This is a collar necklace also from the 50s. This is made by a company called Coro. And this one also uses a hook clasp. As you can see, this one, each piece is actually hinged onto the next. Now another clasp that was very popular, and most of us will probably remember this from the 70s, is the spring clasp. And this is the one we all remember, that you just pull on this little nub right here, and this released a spring, and then you just hooked it up and that's the spring ring. Again, this one, I think everybody remembers this one from the 70s. Here's another one. Now this particular clasp, this one was popular in the 40s. And this one is called the box clasp. And this one basically has this little hook that you press like this and then insert it into the box and release it. And that fastens the necklace. And this one is prior to the 1950s. And finally, this one is the barrel clasp. And the barrel clasp is this one that you have to kind of screw and unscrew. Now another sign that will help you tell if something is truly vintage is the way the stones are set. Now in this one, as you can see, I don't know if the camera can see that, but the stones are not really set with prongs as a lot of vintage pieces would be. These are just glued in, although it looks like with these little round things right here, it might look like it's clasped in. It's not. You can tell that it's flush with the edge right here, and these are just glued in. Those are just sitting in there flush with the setting, and they're just glued. On real vintage items, I don't know if you can see that, but these stones are actually are set with prongs. And this is the prong setting, and the prong is usually 4 to 6 prongs holding a stone together. There's also one called the dog tooth prong, and that's just when you have like a bunch of them holding a stone together. But 4 to 6 small prongs is called just a prong setting. Here's a bigger stone. And here's a little pair of vintage earrings. And these are all set with prongs. Pearls would be the only exception because there are no prong settings for pearls. This is a vintage piece by a company called Listener. And on this one, the little pearls will just be glued in. So that's about the only exception on vintage jewelry where something would not be set with prongs. Another thing that you can look for when you're out buying costume jewelry is look at the piece and look to see if it's actual wear and tear from the piece, as opposed to something that is made to look like it's been worn and like it's older. Like on this one, it's obvious that this has been made to look worn, but it's so even and so precise that you can tell that it was manufactured this way. Where something that is truly vintage will have more wear on some parts, and some parts will be more discolored than others, such as this is on the clasp. And here you can see in the back how this, because it rubs on clothing and it rubs on the skin, how this has obviously faded. The gold tone has faded already, but it's not even. There are places where you can still see more shine than in others. The same with this piece. the camera can't pick it up, but in between here, some of the pieces are a little discolored, and on other parts, it's the silver tone is still pretty nice. Overall, this one is in very nice shape, though. So those are some tips that I hope will help you when you're out looking for vintage costume jewelry. And thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.